Shalom, everyone. It's Nathaniel. We're going to continue with our twice a week Bible studies. We're going to be looking at a year-long series of studies focusing on repairing the breach, rise up and build. So in this quarter, we are going to be looking specifically at two books. We're not going to, again, read line by line and verse by verse, but we're going to be spending a significant amount of time in the book of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah. So both those books are consistent with the theme that the Most High has given for this quarter. So as always, we begin our study reminding ourselves that the scriptures have said that we should study to show ourselves approved unto the Most High, a workman who needs not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And also in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16, we can do so with the confidence that all scripture is God-breathed and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, so that the person of the Most High may be complete, thoroughly furnished unto every good work. So as we enter the study, we are looking at how, when we study, we should study the word and receive the word like a little child does. That our hearts should be open, our hearts should be willing, so that we can hear what the Most High has already said, and more importantly, what he's saying to us at this particular point in time. And of course, we do that in prayer. So we are to continually pray. We are to, as the scriptures say, pray without ceasing. As we do those things, we are in the process individually, as families, as a community, and as a nation, beginning to wake up. We have been asleep far too long, and the study that the Most High is encouraging us to engage is a study designed to wake up the Most High's people. So that's what we're going to be doing. Last time let me see if I can pull this up. Last time we did an introductory lesson, and I'll just share a little bit of that. The lesson introduction. Yeah. Okay, let me take that out. Yeah. The lesson introduction talks about what the theme is for 2022, and that theme is going to affect us on a personal level. It will affect us as we personally take responsibility in our families. When families come together in community, there are certain expectations based on scripture, and then that is what makes us an effective nation of the Most High's believers. So as we move through the study, that is what we are looking at. And let's see if I can. All right, yeah. So last time we talked about the concept of repairing the breach. We're not going to go over that again, but we've already laid the foundation for what that means. And we also looked at more than several Bible verses, beginning with Genesis, looking at this concept of the hedge, because it's the hedge that has to be replaced. As we are studying our lesson, what we looked at is what a hedge actually does when it comes to the concept of a vineyard, and then what that looks like in terms of our relationship, not only with the word of the Most High, but also with the Most High's people. And we understand that the Most High's leaders are actually supposed to be that hedge. So that's one of the sub themes that we're looking at. And that's how we got down to Ezra, We read one verse out of Ezra, but we're going to be looking at more than just the one verse. So just to share that. And so where we are going to go now is Ezra chapters 1 and 2. So I'll bring that up on the screen, and I'm not sure if we're going to spend an entire hour this session, but we do want to spend a little bit of time on it. So let's just do it that way. Okay. So Ezra chapter 1, and I'm going to read the full chapter. Now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Most High, or the word of Yahuwah, by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, Yahuwah stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying, Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, Yahuwah, Almighty of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judea. Who is there among you of all his people? His God be with him, and let him go to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of Yahuwah, Elohim of Israel. He is the Elohim which is in Jerusalem. And whosoever remains in any place where he sojourns, let the men of his place help him with silver and with gold and with goods and with beast, beside the freewill offering for the house of Yahuwah that is in Jerusalem. Then rose up chief of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin, and the priest and the Levites, with all of them, whose spirit Yahuwah had raised, or Elohim had raised, to go up to build the house of Yahuwah, which is in Jerusalem. And all they that were about them strengthened their bands with vessels of silver and with gold, with goods, and with beast, and with precious things, besides all that was willingly offered. Also Cyrus the king brought forth the vessels of the house of Yahuwah, which Nebuchadnezzar had brought forth out of Jerusalem, and had put them in the house of his gods. Even those did King Cyrus, king of Persia, bring forth by the hand of Mithredath, the treasurer, and numbered them unto Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. And this is the number of them: 30 charges of gold, 1,000 chargers of silver, 9 and 20 knives, 30 basins of gold, silver basins of a second sort, 410, and other vessels 1,000. All the vessels of gold and of silver were 5,400. All these did Sheshbazzar bring up with them of the captivity that were brought up from Babylon unto Jerusalem. Okay, so that's the scripture that we're looking at. I'm just going to leave this on the screen for just a second, and I'm going to go over to the comments section of my Bible just to read a little bit of the historical background. So when it comes to Ezra, the book of Ezra, in terms of who Ezra was or who authored the book, Ezra, whose name means help, was a celebrated priest, a leader of the Jewish nation, and a scribe in the law. He is considered the author of the book which bears his name. In terms of when the book was written, it came during the rule of Artaxerxes the first, and that was from 464 to 423 BC, with Ezra returning to Jerusalem about 437 BC. A likely date for this book is between 457 and 450. So in other words, the book was actually written before they actually went into the land. And I'm going to come back to that because that happened in several iterations. We're going to see that in just a couple of seconds. In terms of the theme, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther covered the last century of what we would call Old Testament history, and that's roughly between 538 and 432 BC, or before the Common Era, and describe the reestablishment, excuse me, of the Jewish nation in their homeland, including the rebuilding of Jerusalem and the temple. Don't forget the theme: repair the breach, rise up and build. Okay. The last of the prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, lived during the Jews' restoration. Second Chronicles closes with the destruction of Jerusalem and the captivity of the last group by Nebuchadnezzar. If you remember, when we were looking in our study of Ezekiel, Ezekiel was living during the time of Second Chronicles, when Jerusalem was actually destroyed for the third and final time by the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar. So all of that happened around 586 BC. Ezra continues from Chronicles, Second Chronicles 36, 22 through 23, and Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, being identical by describing the three-stage return. And that's the part that I wanted to get to. That's why I'm reading all this. The main party returning with Zerubbabel. Do I have him? I don't think I do. But in any case, Zerubbabel is mentioned in Second Chronicles. Okay. So this main party returned with Zerubbabel in 536 BC. The next group returning with Ezra about 80 years later. And in 457 BC, about 80 years later in 457 BC, and Nehemiah's party in 445 BC. The book of Nehemiah also details the reestablishment of the nation. Okay, so I just wanted to read that so that you could first of all hear it. Father willing, the next time we meet in study, I will have this lined out in a chart so that it can be seen as well as heard. This is the crux of the study, though, for this particular quarter, talking about January, February, and March. We're going to be looking at Ezra, and we're going to be looking at Nehemiah, because those, again, were two of the times that the commentary is talking about when it comes to the children of Israel returning to the land. Now, why are we looking at that? It's because of the times that we are living in right now. There is a scripture in Deuteronomy. I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 28. And this is a famous chapter. It's a chapter of blessings when the children of Israel do what they're supposed to do, and curses when the children of Israel don't do what they're supposed to do. And those curses are much more severe and much more numerous than the blessings. And so Deuteronomy 28 is used by the people who are beginning to awaken to who we as a people actually are, as the case in point for looking at our people as the children that the scriptures have been talking about. But that's not why I'm reading it, or we're not going to read all of Deuteronomy. I just wanted to point out why Deuteronomy 28 is being used. It starts out in verse 1, it's where it says, "It shall come to pass, if you will listen diligently unto the voice of Yahuwah your Elohim, to observe and to do all his commandments, which I command you this day, says Yahuwah Elohim." that Yahuwah, your Elohim, will set you on high above all nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you shall hearken or attention unto the voice of Yahuwah, your Elohim. This is probably a good time to reiterate. If you notice, oh, I don't think you can see what I'm talking about either. No, you sure can't. Okay. Let me bring that up so that you can see it. So we're in Deuteronomy chapter 28. And I just I read verses 1 and 2. Okay. So now you can see in verse 1, the word Lord is in all caps. Okay. And it's right next to thy God. So whenever you hear me say Yahuwah, I'm dealing with what they call the tetragram, because in Hebrew there are four there are four Hebrew letters, Yud He Vav He, and that is translated in English to Lord, but it really means, it's like a proper name for God. And so when you see the word God in the Bible, and in the King James Version especially, God, even though it's got a capital G, only means an object of worship. Now, when they put the capital on the G, then that leads the reader to understand that we're talking about the object of worship. But it's still a generic title as opposed to who we're talking about. When you see the word Lord in all caps, that's the Yud He Vav He, or the YHWH in English. That is a proper noun. So in other words, we're actually identifying who this God is. So when you hear me say Yahuwah, or some people say Yahweh, that's the distinction. So we're actually identifying which God we're talking about, because if you remember the well in the congregation that I grew up in, they called it the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments. Okay. And so the first of the 10 Commandments is, you shall have no other gods before me. That's part of that first commandment. I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. Okay. Which implies that there are other gods. And that's the part in Western thought, well, especially in Western oriented Christianity, that we miss. In the culture of the people that these Bible verses and these Bible books were written and compiled, they understood that there were lots of gods. Okay. And not only that, there were gods of things, but there were also gods over people groups. So whenever it says, and actually we read it in Ezra, and we'll read it again, but when it talks about the God of Israel, that's a specific God. But the God of Israel was not the God of Egypt or Misraim, for instance, and it was not the God, and he, was not the God of the Medes and the Persians or the Babylonians. All these people had gods. So it's with that understanding that we see, when you have Lord thy God, it's being very specific as to which God is being referred to. Now, again, in Western ways of thinking, we don't start with that premise. But the people who wrote this and were reading this did have that as the premise. So that's why I'm making it known what the differences are. So again, when it says in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 1, it shall come to pass if you shall listen diligently unto the voice of Yahuwah your God. That means the Yahuwah is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so it's to the people who were the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that they understood this God is this is our God. Okay, this is our object of worship. And so our object of worship has standards for us to live up to. And our object of worship has ways of living that he wants us to engage. So that's why, excuse me, when we hear about the Torah and what unfortunately people call the Old Testament or the Old Covenant, which means that it doesn't have any value because we're not in the Old Covenant anymore. When in actuality, that's the foundation for everything that we are looking at, because it came the idea of an Old Covenant or an Old Testament, which is called the Torah, is actually that which comes down from above. And that which came down from above was the word of the Most High and is the word of the Most High. He is our Elohim, and his name is Yahuwah. All right. So I think it's important for us to understand that. Now, having said that, Yahuwah is telling his people, the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that they are to observe and to do all of his commandments, which he commands this day. And when his people obey his commandments, that's when his people are set on high above all the other ethnicities of the earth, because there were other people walking the earth at this time. And so the blessings, as is Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 2 says, all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you. And if you shall hearken unto the voice of Yahuwah, your Elohim. Okay. And then he goes into detail in a general sense how that will happen. You'll be blessed in the city. You'll be blessed in the field. In other words, wherever you're living, there's going to be a blessing on you. The fruit of your body will be blessed. The fruit of your ground will be blessed. The fruit of your cattle and the increase in the flocks and the sheep. In other words, y'all are going to be living large, and everybody else is going to look to you because you belong to the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And therefore, in verse 7, it says, Yahuwah shall cause your enemies that rise up against you to be smitten before your face. They shall come out against you one way and flee before you 7 ways. So even in the face of adversity, when we are in the center of Yahuwah's will, our enemies will be destroyed. That's what this is basically saying, okay? And it goes on and keeps all those blessings being articulating all those blessings. We actually went through this before, and the thing I like about scripture is that it's never old, so we can do it again, and we may want to do that. But in any case, it goes all the way through 14 verses of blessings. But then comes along verse 15, and from verse 15, but it shall come to pass, if you will not listen unto the voice of Yahuwah your Elohim, to observe to do all his commandments. And again, it says all his commandments and his statutes, which I command you this day, then all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. If we obey, the blessings come upon us and overtake us. If we do not obey, if we do not listen, the curses come upon us and overtake us. And then he tells us what all those curses are. And it starts in verse 16 and goes all the way down through the rest of the chapter till we get finally to verse 68. And this is where a lot of people spend time, but in actuality, when we study the book of Deuteronomy, what we realize is that Deuteronomy, being a second telling, the Most High has said all these things before. This is just a reiteration of it. And now that we are just coming out of Revelation, remember we said Revelation is basically just a recapitulation of everything that the Most High had already said. Okay. And so now we have in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68, been given from the Most High this last curse, if you will. And the last curse says, and Yahuwah shall bring you into Egypt again with ships by the way whereof I spoke unto you. You shall see it no more again, and there you shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. And actually, what this is really saying, it's unfortunate that it's worded that way, because really what it says is you shall try to sell yourselves for bondmen and bondwomen, which is different than a slave, by the way. Okay, a bondman, it's like, well, it's kind of like, I think we might have talked about this before. You've heard of a bonds person when somebody gets has a run-in with the law and they get put in jail and they have to bond out. Somebody has to pay for them to get out. Okay, so that's what a bondman is. And so what this is actually saying is, there you shall be, you shall try to sell yourselves to your enemies to bond yourselves out, but nobody's going to buy you back. In other words, you're just going to stay in bondage. All right. So why is this being talked about? Because you thought I said we were going to study Ezra. This happened to them. Okay. And it's not a one-time deal. Whenever the Most High's people mess up, this is what happens. Okay, and there is a history of this kind of negative activity going on with our people. So we're in another one of those cycles. That's why I'm saying all of that. Now, when we get to Ezra, they were coming to the end of one of those cycles. Because if you remember, when Babylon destroyed Jerusalem, then what happened was the people who weren't killed were taken captive and brought as captives into Babylon. And I probably should mention at this point, not just anyone was taken captive and taken into Babylon. Whenever the enemy attacks you, the enemy always attacks your strongest and your most brightest first. That's what your enemy does. And if the enemy can use your strongest and your most brightest, then they become the strongest and the brightest for their purposes. If they can't use you, then they kill you to make sure that you are not going to come and try to overthrow them. All right. So when we talk about Ezekiel, when we talk about Jeremiah, and now we're looking at Ezra, all those people were of the well, our whole study is about the hedge. Okay, all these people were a part of the hedge. All right, they were a part of those who were to look out after the needs and the interest and the protection of the Most High's vine, which was in the midst of this garden. Okay, so we're still looking at that that analogy, if you will. Now, so having that as an understanding, Ezra, as it says, was a priest, and and actually so was Ezekiel. That's why so much of Ezekiel is temple related, because it was the temple where all of the leadership took place. The priests were more than just religious figures. They were actually the intermediaries between the Most High and his people. They were the keepers of the law. And that's where you get into the scribes and the Pharisees. Well, the Pharisees came along much later, but in other words, or the lawyers, I'll say it that way. So the best and the brightest, that's what I'm trying to get at, were the people who went into captivity. The average Joe, if they weren't killed, they either ran off, and they didn't run north, by the way, they ran south, because the scriptures say that. And some of them just stayed where they were, because without a leader, they were in essence stateless, leaderless, hopeless. And so they stayed in the land, but they were in the land of when I say in the land, I'm talking about Jerusalem and Judea. They were in the land, and they were seen as the despised, because one of the curses, let's see, well, I'll just read it in Deuteronomy 28:65. And among these nations shall you find no ease, neither shall the sole of your foot have rest, but Yahuwah shall give you there a trembling heart, failing of eyes, and sorrow of mind. And in verses a little bit further up, it actually says you will be despised in the eyes of all of these other people. And so even in their own land, they were despised. All right. Because they didn't listen to the voice of the Most High. And so that's the backdrop. Then when we get to Ezra, the Most High had told Jeremiah, because Jeremiah was also one of those, one of the elite. He was told by the Most High, your people are going to go into captivity because of their rebellion against me, and they're going to be there for 70 years. Okay, because they spent 70 seasons, or 70 shmitas, if you will, which was every 7 years there was supposed to be a resting of the land, which Israel never did, by the way. And so that accumulated that into 400 and some years, or 70 seasons. So they were then to be in captivity for those 70 years, and they were coming to the end of the 70 years, and this is where as we pick up with Ezra. So I wanted to get that understood. So now we'll go back into Ezra, and then we'll talk a little bit more before we close it out. So again, Ezra, and we're looking at chapter 1. Okay. So if you remember, last week we said, well, a couple of days ago actually, we said that Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, is the one that brought Israel to its knees and took the cream of the crop of Israel over into Babylon. That only lasted for a generation or two, maybe a generation and a half. After that, Babylon was overrun by the Medes and the Persians. And that's where this Cyrus, the king of Persia, comes in. They now are in control. And in looking at the history of Persia, Persia's empire was actually larger than the Babylonian Empire. So by this time, Persia is the king of the mountain, so to speak, and Cyrus is the king of that king of the mountain. So verse 1 says, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, the word of Yahuwah by the mouth, that the word of Yahuwah by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, Yahuwah stirred up the spirit of King Cyrus of Persia. This shows us a couple of things. The one that I'm going to call to your attention is the Most High does not need anybody to do what his will is. He will use anyone, he can use anyone, because all souls belong to him, including the soul of Cyrus, king of Persia. So I was talking about all those other gods earlier. Ultimately, the Most High knows there are no other gods but me. Okay. It's the world that doesn't know that. And that's because the world is completely out of step with the rule of the kingdom of heaven, of which the earth is a part. Okay, so the kingdom of heaven is in order, the earth is out of order, and being out of order, the people on the earth worship any and everything, including themselves. They'll worship the sun, they'll worship the moon, they'll worship themselves, they'll worship objects that they have made. They were doing all of those things. They had names for all of these objects. And if you really take time to do the study, what you will find is that regardless of where on the planet people are, pretty much the same pantheon exists. They have different names, and at some point it might be interesting for us to go through that so that you can see that the gods of the Greeks were no different than the gods of the Egyptians, or the gods of the Norse gods, for instance. So all of the objects of worship are pretty much the same objects of worship. They just are called differently by the languages of the ethnicities that have labeled them as such. So, but ultimately, there's only one God, and that's Yahuwah, who is the ruler of heaven and earth. He is the King of Kings. He is the Lord of Lords, even though some of those other lesser gods claim to be the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. So when Cyrus was moved or stirred up in his spirit, that was the true one and living God that stirred his spirit up. And so whether Cyrus believed that Yahuwah was his Lord or not, he acted in such a way that Yahuwah's will was going to be done. And his will at this point was to get his people back into the land of promise, the land that he gave to his people, and the land that they should have remained in had they been faithful to him. Okay, so that's where that first verse is headed. So his spirit is stirred up, and he makes this proclamation throughout all of his kingdom, which is what I said earlier was pretty much all of the known world at that time. And so he put it in writing, and he said, "Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, Yahuwah Elohim of heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth." Well, actually, he does acknowledge that Yahuwah is the Elohim of heaven. Okay. And so he knows where he gets his power. He's given me all the kingdoms of the earth and has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. So Cyrus knows, well, I'm not a part of the nation that house belonged to. So I'm going to have to find somebody that can do this. The Most High has charged me, and I said this last week, so this might be a good time for it to be said again. And within the same context, although the leaders that I was talking about last week should be protecting the blessings of the Most High and the heritage of the Most High, he doesn't really need anybody to do that. Okay, so he's going to get done what needs to be done in order for his will to be manifested. So Cyrus then becomes a part of that, and he then is the protector of a people that have been scattered and torn asunder because of their unbelief and their rebellion to him, talking about the children of Israel. Okay, so but in putting it back, because remember, we're still in that Sankofa mode, go back and fetch it. Cyrus now knows and is going to be a participant of the nation going back and fetching what it never should have dropped in the first place. And that is putting Israel where they're supposed to be. And so he doesn't try to do it himself. He asked the question in verse 3, who is there among you of all his people? His Elohim be with him, and let him go to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of Yahuwah, Elohim of Israel. He is the Elohim which is in Jerusalem. So he's now even identified where Yahuwah is. Yahuwah is still in Jerusalem because that's where his name is. And so just because his people were rebellious, that doesn't mean he has changed. All right. And so verse 4 says, and whosoever remains in any place where he sojourns, let the men of his place help him with silver, with gold, with goods, with beasts, besides the free will offering for the house of Yahuwah that is in Jerusalem. This is another sub theme that we're going to see come up periodically as well. The Most High will always, and I'll say that again, the Most High will always take care of his own. He does not leave his own to die and to languish. Now, he chastises his own, but he never leaves us and he never forsakes us. And he will always provide for us because that's what he does. All right. So when Israel came out of Egypt, they didn't come out empty handed. And now when Ezra is going back to the land of promise, he's not going back empty handed. Whoever the Most High has already pricked in their hearts and in their minds, just like he did with Cyrus, to help in this effort, those people are going to come forward, and they're the ones that give the silver, they're the ones that give the gold and the goods, beast, the free will offering, the whole thing. Okay, and we haven't said it yet, but as this as is on the screen here, holy vessels restored. When the Babylonians took over Jerusalem and destroyed the temple, they looted the temple and they took all of the holy things out of the temple back to Babylon. And as a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons why Babylon was destroyed, because if you remember the idea of the handwriting on the wall, Nebuchadnezzar's grandson had taken those holy vessels and was throwing a party for his boys and their women, and being debaucherous about it with holy vessels. And that's when he saw that handwriting on the wall. You don't mess with the Most High stuff. So they still had, well, once they were overrun and the Persians came, the Persians had it. And so those vessels then are being returned through Ezra to Jerusalem by Cyrus. That's part of what he did. And so in verse 5, it says, then rose up the chief of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin and the priests and the Levites, with all whose spirit Yahuwah had raised, to go up to build the house of Yahuwah, which is in Jerusalem. And that's what they did. So we're going to stop at that verse because we're quickly running out of the time for the hour long study. And then we'll pick up and go a little bit farther. Well, let me just read this last verse in verse 6. And all they that were about them strengthened their hands with vessels of silver, with gold, with goods, and with beast, and with precious things besides all that was willingly offered. You've heard about those free will offerings. Well, this is in the context of that. Okay. And again, it says also Cyrus the king brought forth the vessels of the house of Yahuwah, which Nebuchadnezzar had brought forth out of it Jerusalem, and had put them in the house of his gods. Okay. So that's a good place for us to stop. So we're gonna, Father willing, the next time we'll continue. And like I said, I'll have a couple of slides to bring out what we've talked about, and then we'll go a little bit farther. So we'll go ahead and stop now. So the Father bless you and keep you. The Father make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Father continues to lift up his countenance upon you and myself and our families, and to give us all his shalom. And so we say shalom to you.